Welcome to the Navigating Disruption podcast with Janet Hitchen and me, Mike Klein. Navigating Disruption is a podcast that aims to help leaders and organizations navigate the disruption that lies ahead. In this episode, we speak with comms tech entrepreneur Tarek Kamil. Tarek is the CEO and founder of Cerkl, one of the real innovators at the intersection of communication technology and artificial intelligence. Welcome to the show. I want to start with a quote from you because I think that sets the table for the
Like,
conversation ahead.
that
My
could be
mission
anything. I have no idea what he's about to say. This is going to be great.
Well, it's from your LinkedIn profile, so I think you've seen it before. I'm not manufacturing a quote from you to your face. That would be a bit rude.
Disappointing, but
Okay.
okay.
My mission is to bring intelligence and personalization to every contact interaction, whether it's via email, web, or mobile. By using behavioral analytics, machine learning, and natural language processing, we enable our clients to deliver the right content to the right person at the right time without any guesswork or manual effort. I believe that AI is the secret weapon for modern communication, and I'm excited to share our vision and expertise with the world. I want to follow up with a question on that to kick us off. If AI is the secret weapon, what is the
Mhm.
battle you're intending it to fight?
Well, I think it's a great question. There's really two fronts. So the first front is this idea of personalization, and none of this is new. So if you think about the brands that you engage with on a daily basis, so think Amazon, Hulu, Spotify, they're all doing the same thing. They all look at your behavior. They're constantly getting more intelligent, and everything is tailored to you wherever you go. Every email, every web interaction, every mobile interaction, they make you feel as though you're the only fill in the blank watcher, viewer, subscriber, reader. It doesn't matter. And so, really, my thinking as a technologist, thinking about how internal communications has evolved. So, the first front was how do we bring this technology, this consumer grade experience inside the workplace? So, what does that mean? It means wherever I go as an employee, it is tailored to me. So it isn't ripping and replacing SharePoint. You've already invested in that, or already using Outlook. Maybe you're using Teams or Slack. It doesn't really matter. But why aren't those experiences tailored to me? I think about how machine learning and AI is used by Netflix specifically, because everyone can
Mm.
relate to this. And Netflix does not care if you're on your laptop, your phone, or your TV. They don't drive you to a channel. Compare that. This is like AP English. Compare and contrast that with how big corporations, they force you to your inbox. They force you to certain destinations. That is not how consumers want to be treated. It's not what drives engagement. And so I know I've been referred to as loquacious. I get it. I'm very verbose. I can talk and talk and talk. But the
That's why we
first,
have you on the show.
well, hopefully you have plenty of bandwidth because I can talk about this topic forever. But so the first front is personalization, machine learning, AI to drive personalized experiences. The second front is what we're seeing emerge now, which is all around Gen AI. And how can that help us really tailor the content? So if you think about it in two phases, the first phase is distribution and personalization. So we have to have all of the infrastructure connected, which is not a heavy lift. They've already invested in Microsoft or G Suite or whatever it is. So how do we just make them intelligent so we can drive personalization? That's phase one. Phase two is now within those distribution channels, how is that even further tailored? So how could we use AI to take a core piece of communication, for example, and we want AI to now make 7 derivatives of this based on the audience. So for everyone in manufacturing in Spain, okay, you're going to get this version of the message. And for all of our people managers in North America, you're going to get this version of the message. So go even further. And then you can get down to the individual level where I could say, Janet is very visual. So she wants her message delivered, but she needs infographics. Where Mike, he loves long form. He wants all the details. But how this is impossible to do at scale with people. So this is where AI gets to be really powerful in that we can drive personalization and the content itself to be tailored to the individual.
I love this. I love the vision of it. Is AI there yet? Is AI able to create different versions of the same thing without hallucinating? And can I, as a leader of an organization, or even just as the head of internal comms or communication, can I trust it to do that? Or do you still need manual intervention within those processes in order to make this? Because I love the vision, but I'm not sure I trust the technology yet to do what you're saying.
Yes. I would say this. So if we think about phase one, which is delivering personalized experiences
Yeah.
across channels, that is there. We've been doing
Yeah.
this for 10 years. So I remember speaking at a conference in Philadelphia. This is probably 2019, right before COVID. And my entire session was on what is AI. And no one, it's like they don't even know how it works. They don't understand that's how spam filtering works. That's how nests work. That's how autonomous driving works. That's all around
Yeah.
us already. And
Yeah.
so explaining this is not only coming, this is here. So that was not that long ago. So that people, I would say, even that's a great question, Janet. Even that, communicators are so used to being in control. So they want, and there's nothing wrong with that because the work they do is seen by everyone. There's a big spotlight on what you're
Yeah.
doing. You got a typo or you send to the wrong audience,
Oh, yeah.
everybody knows this.
Mm-hmm.
And so imagine me coming to you and saying, Janet, how do you want to be treated as an employee? And you say, oh, I wish it was all tailored to me. It's all relevant. They respect my time. I'm like, great, we can help you with this. And then I say, here's how it's going to work. You create content and the AI will manage the distribution. So you're not deciding what's the lead story on the newsletter
Mm-hmm.
because what the lead story for me might be very different than Mike. He might have already
Yeah.
seen it on the intranet, but I haven't. So that initial concept is difficult for communicators to wrap their arms around. So they pilot things, they try it out. All of a sudden, they start to see their engagement numbers skyrocket, open rates, click rates, because people are getting hyper tailored communication to them.
Yeah.
So then they trust it and then they embrace it.
Okay.
It is a process, just like anything else. I have a
Yeah.
Tesla and it can drive by itself. And I'm used to controlling the car. So the first time I turn this on, where it is driving by itself, I'm terrified. Like, is it really going to work? And
Yeah.
now I don't even think about it. I've been doing it for 5 years. So in the beginning, yes, I was apprehensive. It's new technology, makes me nervous. I've been doing something the same way for a long time. So I think for phase one, for sure, we have lots of
Yeah.
customers that have really embraced this. And we always ask them, could you imagine going back to the way it used to be? And all of them say, there's no way. I want to do that. I don't want to be responsible for how does every newsletter look in Outlook. Like they don't want to deal with any of this work. They want to be creative. They want to be storytellers. They want to do the employee spotlights because that's fun. A lot of them are journalists at heart. So this AI is freeing them up to do that kind of work. So that's the first piece that I can already definitively say yes. Communicators, while there is initial apprehension, then they become big fans. of how
Okay.
AI can drive personalization across different channels. Phase two is where we are now, which is, what if you let it tailor the message on your behalf to different audiences based on whatever rules you've established? No one knows is the honest answer to that, because it's all just happening. And I think this one is going to be even more nerve-wracking for communicators. I don't think we will get there, and I think there will have to be controls where they want to see kind of the different versions. I don't think we'll
Yeah, you
ever.
can't just automatically publish a different
No,
version without having some kind of control, because that, I mean, personally, I would not trust.
I wouldn't either.
I would need, yeah, yeah,
I wouldn't either. I think what will happen is we'll get to a day where you'll say, I establish rules for my different segments, my different audiences, and I want to deliver this at a, I don't know, seventh grade reading level and whatever. And
yeah,
it will do that, but I think it will sit in a queue waiting for you to approve it. So
yeah,
because you're not doing all this other work that we were doing before, it is going to free you up to have time to look at the queue and say, all right, I've got this message here, the 7 different versions. The first 4 look great. The 5th one, I want to tweak. I don't like how it came up with this, or this is factually incorrect, and I want to teach it. We don't talk like that here. And then you hit
yeah.
OK. Over time, even that process should take less time, but I don't see a day, and I hate saying this. This is like Bill Gates saying, you'll never need more than 16K of memory. Famous last words. Um, so I hate saying it, but I don't see a day in which internal comms will just let it run. You just let it run through the pipes. There's too much that could go wrong. I think there will be a system of checks and balances, but eventually we will get to a place where it is tailored across channel. It knows you, it knows what you like, what you don't like, and it is delivered to you in a way that is most digestible by the recipient.
I'm just going to come back to what you said earlier about not having to have conversations about what's top of the newsletter and and it's not about it. Suddenly that takes that political conversation or really difficult negotiation with some business partners, because it becomes about he or she or they who shout the loudest, as
Yes.
opposed to what actually people care about and need to know in order to be able to do their jobs better that week, that day, whenever. Being able to take some of that conversation or those conversations away from internal communicators is gold, because it takes the emotion out of it, it takes the personal out of it, and suddenly it's about data, insights,
Hmm.
analytics, understanding of the audience, and actually putting the audience first, so the audience get what they need in the order that they need it. That's just made my heart sing.
Well, what makes my heart sing is that it automates production, but not strategy. It automates the process without automating the thought. And that's it. Certainly, that's where I'd like to see this all go. And part of it's my own bias. I'm much better at thinking than managing production processes. So I could definitely see benefits more selfishly. I guess the question that I have is, this is still a top down distribution channel. Um, to what extent are we also going to look at how communication flows laterally? And you and I have had a separate conversation about this. How have you given any thought about the integration of how people communicate with each other into this process?
I think that's where it gets really tricky, potentially muddy, potentially political. Um, I, I think people as consumers understand that technology is watching their behavior and using it to get smarter to deliver an experience which they ultimately love. If I take a huge step back and I say, what is driving really all of this. So I love the Japanese methodology of ask why 5 times. Well, why? And why? And why? I think if you get to the last why here, fundamentally what we're seeing is a shift in what people value. So let me keep going. Uh, Maybe 30 years ago, it was money. I value my money. Um, Today, it's not that. It is time. People value time. There's a line that we are in the information age, and I think that is false. I think we're in the attention age. You are fighting for someone's attention. And so, if you look at the history of how did we get to this place where people subconsciously just value time, think externally, internally, it doesn't matter, just as a human race. How are we here? It is a convergence of a number of factors. So probably the first one was 2007 with the iPhone. All of a sudden, you have this really powerful device sitting in your pocket, and people can access you anytime. And once marketers and employers have figured this out, combined with the emergence of social media, so Facebook is taking off, Twitter is taking off, you've got YouTube taking off all around the exact same time as the iPhone. So we create now, this is one of my favorite statistics. And when people hear this, they're just like, okay, I didn't realize this, but I get it. We create more content every 3 hours than we did from the beginning of time to 2003 combined. So from 9 a.m. to noon, we will eclipse everything that was ever created in terms of content. And that was a statistic probably 5 years ago. I bet it's every hour now. We are eclipsing that. It's just so much content. And so people are being inundated with communication. So fundamentally, this is what we're dealing with, both externally and internally. People value their time. So I'm circling back to they're okay with Netflix learning about me and Amazon learning about me because it's going to fundamentally save me time. I'm not walking through Blockbuster trying to remember what I've seen, what I haven't seen, uh, driving to the store. Netflix dominated Blockbuster because it's convenient and it saves people time. Amazon is dominating because I don't want to go to the mall. I don't want to walk around. I can just do everything in seconds. Saves me time. Where I'm going with all of this is I think there's some level of technology that people are okay with. I think when you get into monitoring kind of internal communication between colleagues, there is a line we cannot cross. I don't believe it is ethical for us to monitor communication between colleagues, even sentiment analysis. I believe that is unethical. I believe it is unethical for companies to monitor that Mike is updating his LinkedIn profile, and we think he is a flight risk because he's doing that. I think that is unethical. They have the right to do all of this. But what is the blowback from employees where they feel like they are being monitored in an unethical way? I think in the culture and the climate that we're in, there is a line companies should not cross. It's okay to deliver the consumer grade experience. It is not okay to be Big Brother, George Orwell, 1984. That is a big problem.
Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode. If you're enjoying the podcast, we'd love your support in helping us reach more listeners. The best way to do that is hit the subscribe button in your podcast app. It's completely free and means you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's content, we'd love you to take a second to leave us a rating or a review. Your support really makes a difference in helping others discover this podcast. Plus, it lets us know what resonates with you so we can keep bringing you more of what you care about. Thanks, and take care from me, Janet in London, and Mike in Iceland.
It's interesting that you say that it's unethical. given that there's, certainly organizations have, ownership of their infrastructure.
Mhm.
Um, unethical is a point of principle. And it's interesting that you say that it's attention that's the currency here. I agree to a certain extent that attention's the currency. But I also believe very strongly that there are varying degrees of attention out there. And there are certain people who care a lot more about certain things than others do. And that people who care often drive the word of mouth more than the people who don't care. So the issue is, are we getting, first of all, are we really talking about hyperfiltration rather than hyperpersonalization? And second, given that most of the communication in an organization actually takes place between people rather than through, however sophisticated it is, top-down infrastructure, to what extent is there a gap that, um, that needs to be addressed somehow?
I agree with all those points, Mike. I think yes, most communication, 90% of the communication is happening between work colleagues. They're in their own private channels and Teams or Slack. It's emails back and forth about a topic. It is Zoom calls, Google Meet, whatever. Uh, it's probably even greater than 90%. But there's a reason when we talk to companies and we're asking them things like, when you do an engagement survey, do you know who's responding? And they'll say, oh my gosh, no. We're not allowed to know down to the individual level what's going on. We have a minimum cohort of 12 people. So we can't personally identify anyone. Are they allowed to do that? Of course they're allowed. Why don't they? Because the blowback from their employees is so costly. Like if employees knew that this was happening, you're going to have a talent retention issue. It is not worth it. So where I say it's certainly legal, they're certainly within their rights to do all of these things. I say the cost to the company is not worth the benefit. And I do think it's unethical. I would want to know as an employee that this is happening. And if they're not disclosing that, that's even worse. So I
So,
just
so
think
you're
about the negative repercussions of, I just don't see the value outweighing the risk for these organizations.
so you're okay with organizations doing it voluntarily. You're just not okay with it being captured without any explicit permission from the participants. Is that a fair characterization?
I would say yes. If the organization communicated that out and said, hey, here's what we're doing, and here's why, here's how it's going to benefit you, that's a whole different conversation. If they were transparent about it, I don't know any organizations that are doing that, but if that was the path they were going to go down and people are okay with it, then sure. Yes, I think that would be great.
I think I was going to say it's making me think about some of the stuff that Amy Edmondson has done on psychological safety. And if you take an organization, like we're talking about corporate organizations, but she does a lot of her research in medical field. And doctors, nurses, they know they're being monitored. They know they're being watched because the outcome is fairly clear. Either the patient lives and thrives, or the patient lives and doesn't thrive, and there's more work required, or the patient sadly dies. So it's really sort of interesting that you're kind of coming. I agree with the idea of, yeah, be upfront about it. Like if you say, we're giving you this laptop, we're giving you this technology, we're giving you your the phone that you use, and these are the things that we're going to do because this allows us to be able to do X, Y, Z, learn about you so that we can deliver better, more personalized in exactly the same way that Netflix does, so that you get to watch the films that you want, and they're the things that surface for you so that you can find that really tacky Christmas film that nobody else loves but you will. Great, knock yourself out. And I think there is there is something about being honest about who you are, which then if people understand that, then they've gone into the whole thing with their eyes wide open. And psychological safety can happen, you can trust, they can feel psychologically safe because they know where the guardrails are, they know where the boundaries are. But it's if you have all of those things, and I had this conversation probably a good few years ago at an organization that I was at, and someone said, but they can't track me on my work laptop. And somebody who worked in IT and I both went, yeah, they can. Of course they can. And there was a lack of understanding because it just gets lost. It's, oh, well, I've been given this laptop. I can do what I like with it. It's still company property. And yes, that's still linking into company servers and infrastructure and everything else. So if they did want to do something, yes, they could go and find that out about you. And I thought that was really interesting. So it's about, yeah, there's a thing about being honest and not being honest in order to allow psychological safety to exist, and in order to allow the employee to have a choice. I've made a choice. I understand what that looks like, therefore I do. Which is why you have some people who say, I think there was a period about 10, 15 years ago where you got given a company phone and people said, well, I don't need another phone, it's fine. And then after about 10 years of that, they said, actually, I want my personal phone because I want certain things that I do to not be monitored. I want my social media to be off the work phone. I want everything that I do in my personal life to be off the work phone. And they were establishing clear boundaries. And I think it's about clarity, it's about boundaries, it's about being honest so that you can have that psychological safety, which allows you to have trust. And I'll shut up now.
Well, Janet, I couldn't agree more. All I'm saying is I think there is a relationship with your workforce. There is an expectation of how they will be treated. And there is a line we cannot cross as employers. So if I continue with the Netflix example, so Netflix is learning that although Janet says she likes subtitled Italian black and white, she never watches them. She's watching Tommy Boy and Chris Farley, and
She's watching Emily in Paris. Ooh.
That's fine. I'm not judging. And so it gets smart based on your behavior. And you're okay with that because it makes intelligent recommendations fundamentally to save you time. Now, if I said, what if you found out Netflix was also listening to your conversations as you watched on your laptop or your phone? All of a sudden, we have an issue.
Yeah, give me the ick.
That is a violation. You have crossed a boundary. And that's what I'm saying employers need to be hypersensitive to. While probably this is illegal for Netflix, but employers could monitor everything that's going on within their infrastructure. They have the right to do this, but should they? And my answer is they should not. The risk to Netflix, if it came out that they were listening to your conversations while you watch Netflix, even if it is to better tailor, it doesn't matter. People will lose their minds as they should, and employees will lose their minds as they should. They don't mind the company learning that Mike's always engaging with community service related content. So we're going to serve that higher for him than Janet because we can see from his behavior that matters to him. That's just saving him time. It's unearthing content he's going to find interesting. If we go the next step of the company monitoring direct conversations between Janet and Mike on Teams or Slack or whatever, that is where I think you are going to have blowback that it is not worth it.
Right. So there's, the reason I bring this up, and I'm fairly vocal about this in the space, I'm not necessarily interested in organizations finding out the substance of the interactions with people. But at the end of the day, 3% of people drive 90% of conversations in the organization. This is something that's, Innovisor out of Copenhagen has done a shed load of research on this, and it's documented to the point where I can say that it's factual. And a lot of the effort that organizations spend in communication is inundating that 90%. Certainly, hyper personalization is one way around it, but it's not necessarily the most efficient or effective on its own. The issue is how do you add this element without spooking out the population? And it sounds like taking an embedded approach is something that's a bit perhaps too close to the line than, say, doing an occasional social network survey and pulling out the data that people willingly supply. Um, I think that's a fair line. Um, but I also think that, to a certain extent, an organization, given that attention is an issue, has some opportunity to at least understand who's paying attention to whom, as well as who's paying attention to what.
I agree. I think there's a so let me give you maybe a way to tackle this problem
Okay.
that is what I would call ethical. So let's say I have an organization, we have 10,000 employees. And to those 10,000 employees, I send out a survey. And the survey is really targeted at who do you rely on in this organization, right? So we send out the survey to 10,000 people, and the Mike saying Janet is number one. I go to her when I have questions. I spend most of my time. That's where I learn the most. Great. And I say Janet's number one. And lots of people start to say Janet is number one. So when you get the data back, you have clusters. We would see Janet is a big deal in this organization. All right. So we can identify that, let's call it 3%. Who are the real influencers within this organization? Let's say Janet is on that list. Then, if you have the ability to tailor content, I put the 3% in their own segment. So for the 3%, I'm going to communicate very differently than for everybody else. So for the 3%, when I make an announcement, CEO's message, whatever, I'm giving them additional information because I know most people aren't going to read potentially my communication, but they're going to go to Janet. I want her to be completely armed and equipped to answer these questions because she is a beachhead for us. That is where people go for their information. So there are ways to do this that are completely ethical and are using what our own employees are telling us about where they go for information. And we want to make sure those points of information are really well equipped. We certainly don't want them to leave our organization. We want to make sure Janet feels like a rock star and maybe she's a insider. Awesome. There's lots of cool ways we can do this now without what I would call crossing the line.
Want to explore the burning questions your C suite and clients are asking? Then you should consider the next Navigating Disruption Mastermind. Janet and I will challenge and coach you in an 8 session program. You'll join other Navigating Disruption listeners and other senior comms pros. For more information, follow the Navigating Disruption page on LinkedIn. Right. So the key thing is you wouldn't rely on the data within the system to produce that data, that list. You would actually solicit that information voluntarily from the population. That's actually where I'm at. I mean, the issue is, obviously you've got the potential to do it within the system. But I definitely see that could be seen as transgressive by, particularly if people don't think they've signed up for that. So,
Yes.
I think the main thing is there's a combination here of hyper personalization from a technical perspective and the need to be strategic and get other information from talking to people in the organization as well.
Well, I think there's also a people aspect to this, isn't there? If you're sort of, a lot of the time, internal communicators are going to HR to get the data. We want the people data. We want to know who they are, how you've segmented them, how you slice them and dice them. Great. But actually, if we're able, as a communications team, group, professional, to understand that sort of network analysis of who is the most influential, and it's not necessarily done in a hierarchical way that the HR team have provided the data, because nothing against the HR team, that's how they sliced it, because that's what that works for them and the way that they need to report on it. But being able to have that ability to be able to then play that back to HR to say, we know that these people are influential. We know these people have positions of influence. What can you do to then give those people more time, more space, the ability to be able to not feel like they're being put upon and it's another thing that they're doing off the side of their desk? How can this be incorporated to be part of their role? So actually they're happy doing it and it's not, oh God, somebody else has come to see me. Oh, fine, yeah, okay. I think there's definitely something there. And I've seen it done with people who become heads of ERGs, where they will get a set amount of time. And I know that in certain European countries, if you have a certain protected role, be that employee representative or that kind of thing, then you're given very specific sort of a number of hours a week in order to be able to do that role. I think there's almost a way of internal comms being, instead of just taking everything and being done to, what can you do to kind of flip that script a little bit and actually say, here's some information we can provide back to you that allows you to be able to understand your workforce slightly better based on who are the influencers within the organization. And there's almost that's where internal marketing, much as I hate that term because we're not selling to people internally, but that's how marketeers would segment their audience and think about their audience. And from that perspective, that could be considered internal marketing, not the other stuff, not the sell to your people, because I am absolutely not down with that. So I think there's something really interesting there. One of my questions would be, Tarek, sort of network analysis. And I love all that kind of stuff because I love the fact that you can get quite scientific about how you break things down. A lot of communication professionals are going to be listening to this and going, we don't have the budget, we don't have the ability to be able to do that. We've just about got SharePoint and Teams and that's, we've literally got the lowest of the low. We're getting sort of served the very basic suite when actually what we'd quite like is to upgrade. But we're not getting any of that. So this might be out of reach for people. How do they position themselves to argue for this? How do they put together a business case for this?
That's a great question. So fundamentally, I mean, I hate to say this, but what is the DNA of your organization? So one of the conversations I had with my daughters when they were thinking about like graduated college and they're getting ready to apply for their first job. I say this to anyone who's kind of entering the workforce. At the end of an interview, they will always ask, "Hey, do you have any questions for us?" And the answer should always be yes, I do. And you should ask at least this one question. If you were the CEO of this business, how would you rank the following three things in order of priority? Your customers, your product, or your people? Anyone who answers anything but people first, you don't want to be there. You're going to be thought of as an expense, a liability, as opposed to an asset, a competitive advantage. So there are two fundamental thoughts to this. One is our people help us win. Others are our people are a necessary evil. And for most companies, if you look at their budgets, their single biggest line item is people. Like
People.
70% of what you're spending is on your people. And so it certainly is an easier conversation to have if the DNA of the organization is people first. This is why we win. So I would do it in a couple of different ways. As we have thought about what we do, it's very different. It's a very different way to think about communication. It's a very different way to talk to people, engage people. It's very different than what's been done traditionally. And so if we go to companies where they're not valuing their people, this is going to be an uphill fight. And this will be the same for your communicators in those organizations.
Yeah.
What I would do is I would go to the innovators first. Which companies really believe in their people? And I start there. And then you show success. And
Mhm.
so if I am now, let's say, a communicator at an organization where it might not be people first, let's say it's profit first. Great. There's so much data now that says when we do X, Y, and Z, profit increases because you have engaged employees, because you've
Yeah.
reduced attrition, because you reduced liability and errors and all these other things that companies hate. So if you're not going to resonate with leadership around the value of your people, they fundamentally don't believe this, then you have to talk to them in words that they do agree with. ROI, EBITDA, profitability, increasing revenue. Like it has to start there. And when they look at the cost to do these things, it is so minimal. Like it is really a light lift in terms of time and cost to go from Outlook SharePoint to personalization across channels, learning. Like you have now established the foundation for what is a rounding error. And so most business people, even if they don't put people first, they will put money first. Great. I can talk to you from a money perspective. So from a communicator, I would look what our competition is doing. Look at this case study. Look at these results that these other organizations have done when they have made a slight investment into our internal communication stack. And this sets us up for success going forward. So that's the first thing I would do is I would bifurcate what's the DNA of your organization? If it's people first, this is super easy conversation. They will get it. They will love you. Most communicators don't even know this exists because uh, they're not out there. They're so busy doing what they do. They're so busy drowning in just keeping up with the workload that they're not out being strategic and thinking about what's next. And so I love that we can do things like this podcast and where we can inform them, we can get a lot of these things off your plate. And I think about the last, call it 10 or 15 minutes of this conversation, where it was all strategy. Why are we talking strategy in terms of who are my influencers and how do I want to talk to them and what's the value to the business? Like that is unbelievably strategic. They will never get there if the tools and tech don't support them, if they are reliant on HRIS or IT to do their job, waiting for distribution lists or spreadsheets or whatever, if everyone is fighting them, or if they can't get analytics, like they are pushing a boulder uphill is the
Well,
problem. So
that's
how do we get
that's
too strategic is we have to help them. We have to show them what other companies are doing. And I love your point about marketing. And I don't view marketing as negative. I view it as we want an outcome. And if we say the outcome for an organization would be I want my employees to be both informed and engaged. I'm winning if I could say that. Great. But marketers can see what other marketers do. It's very public. Internal comms is behind a firewall. Nobody knows how you do it. Nobody knows what best in class looks like because it's all hidden. And so they don't know what good even looks like. I love this kind of forum where we can start to expose what best in class looks like through these types of conversations.
let
And
me
what's possible.
What's
I just
possible?
want to cycle back to something here because particularly when you're talking about strategy and you're talking about engaging leaders, what I found in my own experience is that, even if what we offer is net positive from a revenue, from a financial perspective, even the impact can be a kind of a rounding error, as you mentioned. Why should we even bother talking about return on investment? Why not talk about risk? Why not talk about what happens if you don't have people who understand what's going on representing you to their publics? you know, is there, why not move in that direction from the business case perspective?
I I wish we would. I think one of the things that I've seen from, and this is a generalization, most internal communicators are way too modest. They do not take credit for the value of their work. They don't tie the work that they do back to business outcomes. It is a huge miss. They just do it and they never really say, oh, we increased open enrollment by 8% this year. They don't finish. So they do all this great work. They tell all these great stories. They set up campaigns. It's beautifully executed. And they never then finish. They don't say, well, hey, HR, what was the impact of this campaign? Oh, we increased open enrollment by 8%. What's the value to the business in dollars? Okay, every marketer would do this. You don't just launch a campaign and then not ask sales, what was the lift on sales this campaign produced? What is the ROI? But communicators don't do this. And it's
Is
such,
it
you're one step away from greatness.
is it
That they're
really
missing that.
modesty, or is it something deeper?
I don't know that. Well, I think they are modest. Everyone that I've run into, they are amazing people, and but they're not wired as business people. They weren't trained. Internal comms isn't a discipline like marketing is. You're not majoring in internal communication in undergrad. It's starting to happen, and so they don't understand this concept of ROI. They don't understand business value. They understand doing their work and doing it in a great way and delivering on deadlines. They do all those things really well. They're missing the next step of saying, how does this tie back to improving our business?
I'm a huge believer because I do that and have done that and
Yay.
have been able to say, hey, we did this campaign and it was actually the sales team, the commercial team that turned around to us and said, because of what you did, because we created focus, because we created a conversation about the specific thing that they wanted to achieve, and all about that product, that lifted that automatically created a lift in sales, and therefore we made the quarter. And we were able to do that. I wonder, is this around KPIs and measurements? And Mike and I both agree on the fact that an employee engagement survey should not be what an internal communications team is measured on. You should not be measured on the fact that you've gone from 82 to 85. It's completely arbitrary. You could have people. There could be a really bad train strike, and nobody can get into the office, and then they take the thing, and everyone gives you a 60, and it's got nothing to do with anything that you've done in the last year or the last 6 months or however often that happens. But I wonder, every time I talk to people about when I've created campaigns, so when we've created the brief and we've gone out and we've asked people, okay, what are the outcomes? I've not looked at anything to do with the clicks or links or the metrics that exist that I own. All the metrics that actually really work and really are the most important are the ones that are owned by marketing, commercial teams, the HR. Somebody else owns that. Finance.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else owns that metric. And I've gone out and said, but I've been in a project team where we've figured out what are the metrics for the project, and I will take the project metrics and I will use those as my metrics. And it's got nothing to do with this post had 5 likes or 20 likes or this got shared 17 times. I couldn't give a monkey's about any of that, because if you've got the right people with the right information, that's all that matters. And you can't track word of mouth. I have nothing that says, oh, I know that 700 people in the organization had a chat about this during their lunch break, unless we're doing that monitoring, which we've all decided and we've all agreed is not okay. So you've got to look for something else. You've got to look for something around the business. And if your campaign is, well, great, how are you tying that back to the business?
100%.
And for me, this is what you've just said is the biggest thing for how not to be made redundant. If you can prove that the business needs you, or you have supported the business in objective achievement, goal achievement, whatever it might, revenue generation, surely they're going to look at it twice before they decide, actually, that team, we need to look at reducing them by half because they're not pulling their weight. If you're bringing in more than you cost, it should be a no-brainer, right?
Should be
In
a
my opinion.
no-brainer. Yes, because every other part of the business functions that way. Operations, sales, marketing, you name it. They show their value to the bottom line. Ultimately, that's it. It is a business at the end of the day. And so that's where I wish more communicators thought like Janet thinks, where it isn't about clicks or video watches. That has nothing to do with driving. Because if you went to, let's just play the game. So you come to me and you say, we posted this video and I'm the CEO, and you say, and it got 500 views. So I don't know what that means to the business. You need to show the video then was about some new safety procedure. And then you would say, I would ask, okay, did it reduce these incidents? And you would say, yes, it reduced these incidents by 13%. Each incident that it reduced saved us $10,000. Now I'm doing the math to say, holy cow, we spent $5,000 on the video and it saved us $300,000. That is an ROI. That is how business people think. And you're doing all the great work of producing the video. Just show how it ties back to helping the business. You will be a rock star, and it will drive what all these communicators I hear complaining about is, I want a seat at the table. I want to be viewed as strategic. That is the one. You are so close. It is one turn of the dial from doer to strategic to expendable to we must have you. You're a competitive advantage to our business. You're so close.
So you're basically saying it all comes down to our ability to measure and our ability and our willingness to track the impact that we have as much as anything else.
Yes.
I think it's that, but I also think it's the ability to be able to connect the dots, because Mike, earlier you and I, Mike, have talked about reputation, risk, and I think it's not reputation and risk versus ROI. I think the two of them I think you have to hold both of them and you have to be able to do both. So if we go with what Tarek said about the ROI, you make sure that you can actually prove that you just saved $300,000 by spending $5,000. Okay. What has that done in order to protect the reputation of the business and mitigate risk if it was linked to safety? So if suddenly you have gone from, you've spent $5,000, you've now 300, you save 300, and there is a reputation piece, which means that there is no incidents at the factory or whatever that might be. Therefore, you're seen as more. Are you seen as more trusted? Are you seen as more that's something that people know? Are you're able to link back to a value of people, of safety, of these sorts of things? So I think there's almost like a circular piece where you've got ROI, real solid ROI, and business objective, but also a reputation piece that comes off the back of that.
Well,
Does that make sense?
for me, it's more of a question of which is the cart and which is the horse. I mean, ultimately, you need them both. But where I see a lot of internal comms people who are even starting to play this game failing is saying, we've saved you, $100,000. $100,000 doesn't get a CFO out of bed at night. If you've saved 100,000 and your budget's 100,000, then at least you have the ROI case that you're not costing the business anything, and then you can have a more substantive conversation about risk. I guess for me, it's demonstrating that you're not a cost is a good ROI conversation, and demonstrating that you're a strategic asset is probably more powerful on the risk side. Do you have a take on that, either of you?
I agree. I'm going to violently agree.
Excellent.
I would also agree. I think it is both. I think there's also baby steps to get there. You kind of have to prove it. So even in this example of I spent 5,000, and even if I save the company 100,000, I can prove it. All of a sudden, you might say, I want to scale this in 25, right? So all of a sudden, my budget has now gone up by 5x because they know I'm a positive return on investment, and you are thought of strategic. But it has to start somewhere. So I think fundamentally it goes back to the DNA of the organization. We have one customer, they have 6,000 employees, and they have 24 internal communicators because
Wow.
the DNA of that organization is we are a people business. And so they overinvest in people. We have other customers with 50,000 employees, 100,000 employees, and they've got 1, 2, 3. It's very different. And so you have to work your way into proving your value, showing your worth. And it's a process that will take time, but fundamentally, it is how am I tying my work to the business outcomes the C-suite is looking for? That, if you can do that and you can articulate what you've done, you're in a great position, even if it's small at first.
We're seeing a lot of return to office mandates. We're seeing several founders who are in scale ups return to almost this founder mode of, I need people to do what I say, as opposed to I hire smart people and get out of their way so they can do great work.
Mm-hmm.
What are the impacts of these return to office mandates on communication professionals? Is that going to impact our ability to be able to do our job? Are we going to be able to, is it going to, I think Mike is talking about this from a trust perspective. I think he's talking about it from a tech perspective, from a how that is going to shift workforce perspective. All of that rolled into those return to office mandates.
I
Trust,
think
tech, and tone.
the 3 T's, the
The
infamous
three
3 T's.
T's.
Okay. I think our culture right now is really dictated by a couple of things. I think COVID, number one, has let the genie out of the bottle, and people have experienced work from home, and the economy didn't collapse. In fact, it was at all-time highs. We set records for productivity. And so when you see return to office being mandated, a lot of employees are asking why. I don't understand. Everything was fine. This doesn't make any sense. And I think the blowback to those companies will be difficult in terms of attracting and retaining talent, because there's a lot of companies that aren't moving. It's like this works. We reduced our office expenses, travel expense. All these things have gone down, and our employees are happier. This is me. This is me personally. I fundamentally believe if I don't trust you, why would I hire you? This is so logical to me, but I get it. So fundamentally, here's what I do. I look at kind of the guiding light, which is the unemployment rate. If unemployment is down, then, and it's still at historic lows, employees have more say. This is a Seinfeld reference. Employees have hand in this situation. If unemployment is high, the employer has hand. They have control of the relationship. So I really look at that first. Unemployment is still at historic lows. So finding talent and retaining talent is still top of mind for a lot of companies. And so we're not going to go back to full Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 in the office, because you're going to have an exodus. The debate that has happened up until 2020 is what would happen if people didn't have to go into an office? And you have both sides arguing. Well, now we know the answer. We were forced to do the experiment, and nothing bad happened. In fact, I would say a lot of it was positive. in terms of technology, how we work, companies being forced to innovate around how they communicate, engage their people if I don't see you every day. So I would say a lot of positives came out of it, and we know the answers now. So that's the first thing. I always look at the unemployment rate. So I still think employees have hand in this relationship, and for the foreseeable future, that is going to be the case. So I would say for the employers that are going to go back to top down, this do it my way, they are in big trouble. I don't have to work for you. I've got plenty of options. And you're going to see your top people leave you. Who's going to stay? People that can't get a job anywhere else. That's who you want in your organization. So I would be hyper cautious if you were an organization and you want to go back to 2019. I think your future is risky at best.
I think there's some interesting stuff. I was just looking up Nick Bloom, who does some really interesting work on this. So he is a Stanford professor and a top voice on hybrid working. And I know he had an article out in HBR, I think it was about a month ago, looking at A/B testing of hybrid work. And I'm just going to read this because obviously I don't have this out of the top of my head. I'm not that smart and intelligent. So I'm obviously reading this from a screen. But they had two key results. Hybrid and fully in office showed no differences in productivity, performance, review, promotion, learning, or innovation. And hybrid had a higher satisfaction rate and 35% lower attrition rate. Quit rate reductions were largest for female employees. So that's like just one company. So not saying, oh, well, we're different from somebody down the road, or we're the same as Amazon, or we're different from Amazon, or whatever it might be. That's the same company A/B testing and saying, does it work, doesn't it work? And I love the fact that there is no difference in productivity, performance, promotion, learning, or innovation for the same company, and a 35% lower attrition rate for that same company, with the largest reduction being for female employees.
It's all logical.
That's huge for me.
Yeah.
It's huge. Yeah. It's the fact that even if you were to just do the maths on the 35% attrition rate, surely that number, as you know, Mike was saying earlier, oh, if you save them 100,000 a year, whatever, it's chump change. 35% is going to be of attrition and new hires and turnover and all of those costs. Wow. That's going to be much bigger. That's going to be millions.
Yes.
I thought that was fascinating. And that's, you know, he's not just somebody randomly posting on LinkedIn, he's a Stanford professor. So I like him. I follow him.
And it's all logical, right? I mean,
Yeah.
all of this makes total sense. So
Yeah.
I love that there's actual data to support this. It goes right back to where we were talking earlier of, I can tell you, I'm not a Stanford professor, but I can say, I feel like COVID has done some things,
Yeah.
but now we have actual data. And what do the C-suite respond to? 35% drop in attrition. Combine that with reduced office space requirements, lease requirements, all these things. Great. How could you not see the ROI of doing this? But now we have data to make the case versus logically, this is how it should play out.
Anything else either of you would like to add?
Janet.
I was just going to add one other thing on that return to office piece. So there was a study that was done in the UK, and it was all around a movement called the Flex Appeal. And Flex Appeal got sponsored by McAlpine. And Flex Appeal was about working mothers
Who's McAlpine,
can work.
by the way?
McAlpine is a construction company.
Okay.
So the Flex Appeal was started by a mother because she wanted to be able to work more flexibly. She wanted to be able to go and pick her children up and not get charged by the minute for the amount of lateness that she was picking her child up because work wouldn't let her go. So that's where it all kind of germinated from. And then McAlpine, who are a very male heavy, very construction industry. It was an interesting choice when he said, I will sponsor the research for you. And he sponsored the research on flexible working and the opportunity of flexible working, because they were looking at wellness within their population. They were looking at the amount of male suicide that was happening, because they would have people, build a lovely tall building, then jump off it. I say that flippantly. It's not flippant at all. It was a real problem, and he wanted to understand what he could do, and would flexible working support his workforce better. And they published, and I think it was probably it was mid-COVID that they published their findings. And they found that flexible working was worth something like 5 trillion to the UK economy.
Wow.
Yeah, it was huge amounts of money that this could be worth by allowing people to work flexibly.
That's amazing.
And it's, yeah. So I'll just leave that one there. It was called Flex Appeal, and it was led by the delightful social media influencer Mother Pucker.
A great name.
who still fights that fight. But I love, again, with the work that Nick Bloom is doing, and then you've got actual tangible work from, and they're not a company where it's mostly women that work at that company. It's a construction company, and he wanted to understand how he could reduce what he could do to support reduction in male suicide, and would flexible working actually support that? So if somebody thinks flexible working is all about women and mothers, it's not.
It's amazing.
That's my last little bit for the for the episode.
That's a big knowledge bomb you've dropped.
Well, I guess the question that I have is whether the license that certain alpha males are seeing to flex their muscles is going to outweigh the weight of this data and this logic and this ROI over the coming years.
We shall see.
Ultimately, I think shareholders will have more influence than someone's ego. At the end of the day, you're measured based on numbers. All companies are. And so if you have numbers that are undeniable, your shareholders are going to put pressure on you regardless of your ego. And if you are unwilling to get behind this, you're not going to be leading that organization for much longer. So I love this. I love data. I'm a nerd, so I love the data. And one of my big tenets, just in general, is you have to get ego out of the way. You have to. And so, Mike, to your point, I think those that refuse because it's their ego, this is the way we've always done it, and we want to go back to the old way, I think they're in big trouble. So I'll leave you with one thing. We started the conversation around AI, which I love. We've been saying this for 10 years. We do this with our customers. So the technology exists. One of the things I hear when I'm talking to communicators is, will AI displace me? And so I think the answer to that really is threefold. One is AI will enable you, not replace you. So Mike, you mentioned this earlier in our conversation around production work. So if you let AI do the production work, the things you don't want to do, and it frees you to be more strategic, more creative, storytelling, AI can't replicate that. It's not going to go interview the employee that's been there for 30 years and shoot a video and give their backstory. It will not do any of those things, and it frees you up to do what you really love to do. Two, which we also talked about, is it now frees you to be more strategic. So think about the ability to free yourself from HRIS and IT. Just the example we gave of understanding who my influencers are, and I want to talk to them differently because I know they impact the organization. The ability for you to do things like finish the conversation around ROI. If you are constantly drowning, you can't then take the next step to say this video actually produced this benefit to the company. So you'll never become strategic. AI can enable that. And lastly, I believe it will make you future proof. So those who start to embrace it now versus fight it. I think about newspapers fighting the internet. They're not in a good place, and they had such an advantage to be early adopters. So I think communicators who embrace AI and say, yes, bring it to me. I see how it can help me do more of what I love and be more strategic and help the business. I think those people really will be the leaders of internal communications going forward. The end.
I think that's a great place to stop.
Fantastic.
Well, you've been both wonderful. I love the dialogue and the conversation, and hopefully it was thought-provoking for all your listeners.
Well, it was certainly
Tarek?
thought-provoking for us. I would say that.
Yeah, we had a good time.
Absolutely.
Yes. Selfishly, that's true.
Tarek, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise, it was great to meet you. Mike, as always, great to see you again. And hopefully I'll see
Absolutely.
you in person relatively soon.
Outstanding.
And you too, Janet. I'm going to come to England.
Always welcome.
Thank
Cups of
you.
tea in London. We're on it.
Can't wait. Thank you for having me. It was delightful.
And we're back for a little wrap up of this rather epic conversation that we had with Tarek Kamil. Janet, what are your thoughts?
I was pretty blown away actually by how he's described that personalization, that ability to use AI really cleverly to take away some of the really difficult conversations that a lot of communications professionals don't want to have internally. Either because they're scared of them or because they're just too big a conversation or they're just too much of a political hot potato. But some of that conversation about the ability to be able to give content to the right people at the right time in the right way in the right order, which is something that is just real basic 101 com stuff and that we've been fighting about for trying to do really well for years. And he's got there's a way to do that. So I was pretty blown away, I'm going to be honest. And I love the simplicity of what he says. If none of this is complicated, none of this is complex or needs to be over engineered. There was nothing about the conversation that made you think, oh, I'm really struggling, or this you need a degree in engineering to understand this, or it's really simple. And he's figured out what some of those real gnarly problems are and figured out a way to solve them. And I think that's pretty impressive.
Well, I agree that certainly the personalized content journey and the ability to to integrate AI to enable that is very impressive in terms of getting the people the right content in the right place at the right time. There was some considerable discussion about who are the right people, which we opened up a whole ethics conversation that I wasn't expecting on this at all. That kind of floored me. I mean, it was obvious when he was saying it, but it kind of floored me. But I'm left with two things from a communication person's perspective. One, this hyper personalized AI driven engine type approach to a comms platform will save you a lot of time and energy on the production side, but you're going to need to use that time to do data collection, data monitoring, ask the right questions of your other stakeholders, and have the ability to track the impact of this engine on the business. Because if you're not doing that, either you're at risk of losing the tool or you're at risk of losing your role ultimately. The second thing is that, if the platform isn't going to be used to tell you who the right people are, then you've got to invest the time and energy in the surveys, doing social analysis, whether it's um, snowball analysis or full-blown organizational mapping, to figure out, okay, how does this all fit together before you just
Yeah.
unleash this tool on everybody.
I think the one thing that I really, we didn't mention it, because the kind of the conversation was in full flow, and so I just let it go. I think some of the time that can be saved with some of the proposed stuff that AI can do is not just for content production at the other end. I think it's back to having, and this is really close to my heart. It's about having business partner conversations. It's about investing time in understanding the business and really creating robust relationships with the business partner and the business to understand what their problems are. And I think a lot of times people say, oh, well, I don't have time to invest in those conversations. So I just go and I take notes. They can tell me what they want and I go away because I don't have time. If that time is given back, yes, you can create better content, but ultimately, for me, use that time for creating better business partner relationships so that, as we talked about in the pod, you can create business outcomes. You can link to the business outcomes that will ultimately make you really valuable for the organization. That for me is gold, and I hope I'm really interested to see what everybody that listens to this thinks. I absolutely can't wait to hear the discussion that we get into in comments on social media and group discussions and all that kind of good stuff,
No,
because I think this was an absolutely it was such a good, rich conversation.
yeah, I thought it was an absolute cracker too. I want to just pick up one other point that we got into, which was that part of the barrier to these conversations taking place, implicitly isn't that it's really just about time. It's about, Tarek called it modesty. I'm going to call it confidence or insecurity. The extent to which communication people perhaps even hide behind their work or their workloads in a way that keeps them out of the conversations on the front end with their business partners or on the back end with their data. That if we're going to be moving into this world, then we need to take a step up in terms of our confidence and proactivity, um, both to get the content right going in and to get the measurement right coming out.
Well, to be able to have the right conversations as well. So if you're sort of suggesting that suddenly it's AI that are going to be that's going to be choosing the order of stuff, and there will be some business partners who will violently disagree with that, because them shouting loudest no longer works because the AI doesn't care how loud they shout. It really doesn't. So there's going to be something you're going to have to be able to have if you're introducing on this. If this is the way, if this is the direction of travel, think about the types of conversations that internal communications business partners, leaders need to be having with their business partners, with the C-suite, with the board, to make sure that they actually understand what this means, what this does, why this is a good idea. That's a very different conversation, and that requires business understanding. And I mean, absolutely, it requires the confidence, but it requires an understanding of these things so that you can actually sell it into the business and that you can make sure you're selling your idea. And that's not to mix that up with the old internal marketing thing again. No, but you've got to be able to sell your idea, and you've got to be able to sell the project so that you get what you need, so that you create ultimately the solutions and the content that people want to consume, which creates the outcomes that the business ultimately needs.
Right, and the ability to overcome often rigid objections from stakeholders as well. Because, I
Yeah.
mean, one of the biggest banes of my existence when I was working at House was working with stakeholders who had like KPIs that said inform all employees. Well, if AI is deciding which employees are going to get what, going to get which information, then you're really having a conversation with that stakeholder. Do we override the entire system so that you can get your PMO newsletter out to 50,000 employees around the world?
Or alternatively, let's look at, inform all employees. It's a crappy KPI.
Well, of course it's a crappy KPI, and of course we often have no say in people deciding this for themselves. It's going to create some very interesting jurisdictional battles as well.
Hang on to your hats, grab some popcorn. This could be fun.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike.